And this is also what has been driven what has driven our next speaker in analyzing the Attract project portfolio. So not only looking at technology, but also the dynamic created by the portfolio in a sense, and look at the portfolio as a baseline and to look from there on how can it evolve, or what are the triggers or the information or the signals that this portfolio is sending. So I'm really pleased to welcome Professor Jonathan Wareham. So he's actually Professor of Information System and former Dean of Faculty and Research at Esade Business School. And he's also an Attract Project Consortium board member. So Professor Wareham, thanks for joining us to share the results of your study on the 170 Attract projects. You're going to start with a presentation, and then we will take a question from the audience. I realized that you were a bit shy in the previous panel, so I really invite you to get your brain cells working and looking at the presentation of Jonathan to ask him the question that you want to be answered, especially to understand what's really in this 170 project portfolio that Attract has created together. Jonathan, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Romain. Well, let me start by saying what I'm going to present to you is, where the data are coming from. And as you know, the whole idea of Attract is that, Europe in the aggregate is spending a lot of money, investing a great deal of resources in building some of the world's most successful and prestigious scientific research infrastructures. And in the course of doing that, they have to develop technologies that simply don't exist anywhere on planet Earth. So we can't call a big technology provider like Siemens or Philips or ABB and simply order it off the shelf. We have to invest tremendous time and resources to develop these technologies. And, I could give you all sorts of exciting examples, but I don't have time for that. But the idea with Attract, of course, is that since these technologies have been developed and tested and piloted and operated at scale, can we not find alternative uses for them in the European economy so that they can create products and services and, of course, entrepreneurial startups and jobs that can benefit the European Union economy? Now, so as Attract as an instrument is an experiment, right? I mean, it's not something to our knowledge that we can look back on and say, here's a model for how to do this. And it's a very bold experiment, not only by the partners of Attract, but by our funders at the Commission, but also the project owners who jumped into this and said they wanted to be part of it. What I'm going to show you is data from the portfolio of 170 projects that were selected from a pool of roughly 1,200 projects over a year ago. And so we put out a call, and over 1,200 applicants applied. And the idea was that, it had to be a minimum of 2 organizations, and they had to be using some of these fantastic technologies from scientific research infrastructures or other research organizations to find some new, exciting, alternative, high potential use for them. The data I'm going to show you is not, so anyway, we out of those 1,200, we selected 170. The data I'm going to show you is in no way a assessment of the success of the projects, because it comes really from a text analysis from those 170 project applications that were evaluated well over a year ago. So this is where the data are coming from. And it's really important to emphasize this. It's not an assessment of success or anything like that. The data are taken from the project descriptions that we received initially over a year ago. But nonetheless, the demographics and the distributions are really interesting, and even from that we've learned something as members of the program consortium board of Attract. So what I'm going to do now is try and share my screen and show you my presentation. And here it is. And hopefully that works. Is that showing correctly? Yes. Okay. So basically, when we look, and if this isn't showing correctly, please speak up so I can correct it. When we look at the 170, okay, thank you. When we look at the 170 attract projects, we can say, well, what were the sources of them? What technologies were they coming from? And what were their, stated applications and proposals? And over on the left-hand side, or at least my left-hand side, we see there are sensors, which are by far the largest ones. And if you think about the fact that many of our constituent organizations are in particle physics or synchrotron radiation or something like this, then that makes perfect sense. The second largest category was data acquisition systems and computing. Many people don't realize how much incredible technologies that are developed around scientific research infrastructures at the level of computation technologies. And of course, software and integration as the third category. And finally, the smallest category was front and back end electronics, more of the infrastructure. If we look at the application spaces, by a vast majority, healthcare was the most obvious one. And if you think about, things like PET scanners or MRI scanners and so forth, you know the history of those devices. It makes perfect sense that big healthcare research, big science research infrastructures would continue to nourish that segment of the economy. Then we have areas like electronics, biology, diagnostics, chemical analysis, environmental applications, neuroscience, and then going down in the lesser applications like robotics, security, Internet of Things, and so forth. Now, doing a text analysis on all these applications, what we came out with was a clustering algorithm that looks something like this. And basically, it's a different way of looking at the same data, but basically we found three main clusters. The blue one being healthcare, right, which is consistent with what I showed you before. The green one being consumer products, environmental products, security, a more heterogeneous group. And then the third cluster are what we would say are still in the realm of scientific research. That is, they didn't go out and define some consumer electronics product or some downstream product, but they still very much stayed in the realm of scientific research. And what can we interpret from that? I think it's important to highlight that when we're talking about these technologies, and I would encourage you to go to the website, look at them, we are very much talking about very sophisticated deep tech. And when I say deep tech, I mean deep in the sense of it really is been developed for one particular context. And the life cycle, or the path to actually bring it to market can be a long one in many cases, and it takes a lot of time. And that's why we're still seeing that some of these projects, are still in the realm of improving things for scientific research contracts with possible, potential applications further out. But they're still fairly far in before getting there. That being said, 2/3 of them were pushed away from their original domain and do have well defined target spaces. Now, when we look at market scope and maturity, we find sort of a similar pattern. If we look at the first graph, if we can think of, if we look at the number of projects, how many have had a specific market application defined? Close to 60 out of 170. Many of them were in the middle. They said, we intend to use it this way, but as a technology, as a core technology, it can be used in a variety of applications. So the universe really is, the application space is really wide open. And then finally, a lesser, maybe less than a third were saying, these are general purpose technologies that can benefit many, many different types of projects. And that's a good thing too. When we look at their location in the value chain, we can see that, if we, to the degree that we can evaluate this from reading the applications, about 55% of them are upstream, right? and 45% of them are downstream. That is, it's another indication of where we thought in terms of how close to the end market they are in terms of their applications. That is, would it be a product that would be sold to an end user tomorrow, or is it an intermediate project or component that would be sold to a manufacturer? Finally, if we look at technology readiness levels, we see them very much clustered around 2 out of the traditional 9-point scale. This is very much in lines with expectations when we formulated the call. The whole purpose of Attract is to move a lot of these technologies from low-tech TRL levels to higher ones, and so that was very much consistent with our expectations. Going to the next slide, when we look at something like technology novelty, this is clustered around 3 and 4, which is pretty good. That's more or less what we expected. When we look at technology relevance to the market, we see them also clustered around 3 and 4, which is good. When we try and sort of grade the credibility of their budgets, their milestones, the business logic, the business value proposals, we see also this clustering on 3 or 4, but with somewhat more dispersion. Right? Very good. What can we interpret from these graphs? I think to a large extent that a lot of the projects, or let me put it this way, the focus for Attract was to get projects that would never be commercialized out of the laboratories, out of the research infrastructures, and get them a few steps closer in that process. And, in that respect, Attract has been successful, right? These are not projects that otherwise would have gone to market. And so we very much are dealing with projects that need the support of Attract to make those first steps. Now, before I transition to the next slides, I want to take a little segue and mention something. And when we think about Attract, we often call it, what we're trying to do is systemize serendipity, which, we mean this intentionally provocative. We mean it intentionally as counterintuitive, oxymoronic, if you will. And the idea is that in all the narratives and the discourse surrounding innovation, entrepreneurship, or even scientific discovery, there's a tendency to romanticize the role of accident or serendipity. Scientists or engineers were trying to solve one problem, and some anomaly came out, and they found another application for this. Now, these are great stories. We don't discount them, but at a normative level, it really has less utility if you are a bank or a venture capitalist or someone who's going to invest lots of time or energy into these projects to bring them closer to market. And that's problematic, we think. We can't just go around talking about these little anecdotes. And what we want to do with Attract is put some purposeful governance on this serendipitous process. So what we did is, when we looked at some of our projects, if we try and categorize them as innovation archetypes, what are we finding? And what we find is the following. 41% of them are combining technologies from different research domains to produce a new application. So we can get one from sensors and one from computation, and they merge these things to do something fundamentally new or different. 31% are improving technologies from previous research to make them more effective. Okay, so taking research and improving their efficacy or adding new features to technologies. 27% are applying existing technologies from one domain and applying them in a different research domain. And this is probably in lines with our traditional definitions of innovation and serendipitous innovation. Finally, 14% added machine learning or artificial intelligence to a technology to improve its efficacy or functionality. So that's interesting, and that taught us a lot. Now, this next little bit of data I'm going to show you came from a recent questionnaire that we sent out to the Attract project owners, just to get some data on their perspectives of how they saw the experience with Attract, working with Attract, and so forth. And I'm just going to present you with a little bit of some of that data that we collected, just to get a sense of what we learned from that. So first of all, affiliations, where do you work? Most work for universities or research institutes. And that's very much in line with our expectations, our targets. We have some participation from startups and SMEs. That's great. I think we probably would have liked to have seen more startups and SMEs in working alongside with the universities and research institutions, and that's something we can think about how to address. Timing. When was the earliest time you performed any of the activities? And basically is, were you working on this or thinking about this before Attract came along? The vast majority had the project idea before Attract. They were looking for funding before Attract. And, a little over 40% were already working on the project before Attract. And they certainly knew their partners and had been collaborating with them. And so this is an indication of, they had these great ideas. They were working in a particular context, and then Attract came along and sort of kickstarted their ability to take this project to the next level. The next slide I have is, where did the project idea come from? And this is also real interesting for us to know. Over, almost 75% of the projects said, well, it's a direct extension of my research, which is logical. It came out of a methodological attempt to solve a problem. Okay, they were facing a problem and looking for fixes for it, some new way of fixing it. Suggested by an academic collaborator or as by its personal insight. So these are interesting findings of the origins of the Attract projects and how we can better sort of tie into these serendipitous moments of our project owners. Activities pursued. With respect to your previous research, what new directions were you able to pursue due to Attract? What did the Attract funding and the participation in the program allow you to do? The vast majority said validate the technological feasibility of the idea. And once again, here we're dealing with deep tech, and we're talking about a project lifecycle which is less than 12 months, right? And so that's important to keep in mind. Use new technologies and techniques, dig deeper into my research, or explore applications in a different field. I think by and large, as Attract members, we're very happy to see these responses, because it does suggest that they are doing things that are very, very constructive that they otherwise wouldn't have been doing in the process of maturing the project. Finally, project outcomes. What did Attract enable you to gain? Many, vast majority said industry contacts, which is really, really good. We're very happy with that. And the reason we are is because we fully expect that, since many of these projects came out of a highly engineering focused context, that with teaming up with commercial partners that have sales channels, which have the whole machinery in place to commercialize technologies, that's far better than having them trying to develop it or learn it on their own, right? It really makes sense for them to go out and to team up with the industry partners that have that whole infrastructure in place. So we were very happy to see that. And then the second, answers 2 and 3 are Attract funding from national or private sources. And that's positive too. We hope that will improve in the future. And finally, next steps. What are the next steps for your project? Vast majority said they want to continue working on it, further developing the technology, or continue with the original idea towards commercialization. And interestingly, a few said pivot and test another idea, but not very many, hopefully. So these are some insights from the Attract data we've collected. And once again, I do think that it's important to recognize where we're getting this data. And that is, it's in no way a validation of the success of the projects. Rather, what we are looking at are diagnostics from initial reports and questionnaires sent to the survey respondents. And I'm really looking forward to moving into the final phases of the Attract project, where we can actually start looking at the projects themselves. And our scientific committee will do that and start evaluating the substantial progress that they've made. And then we can sort of put all this data together and really get some exciting insights. Romain?
Yeah, thank you, Jonathan, definitely for these insights. I think the viewers are quite shy on sharing questions, so I still invite you to share some questions. We are monitoring them. So the moment you share, normally the moment we see them. Before this, Jonathan, you were saying that indeed you're looking forward to having the elements of analysis that would come out of the results of the project. But also, I just said what you said. There are some elements coming up, but I wanted to mention, to ask you before I just have a quick look at the questions. You still had the possibility, because you had the look from the angle of, okay, what was submitted at the moment of the call, and then also the answer from the survey. So were there any surprises in terms of maybe what the project owners did with the funding, or the origin of the project ideas, things that you would tell yourself, or the fact that they were actually looking at the possibility for asking for the possibility for ideas before Attract?
It's a we simply had no idea, I guess. Just to put it that way is that we had some, the people who designed Attract, our colleagues who designed the original proposals, had some, of course, when they're working in scientific research infrastructures, they have a very good sense of how people are working and what potential exists there. So when we get the actual data back, that's a very strong statement for us. Some things that I personally find of interest is so many of the applications are in healthcare compared to a lot of the other applications, for example, industrial internet or security or energy or something like that. What is pleasantly surprising is, as you had mentioned, is that many of these engineers did in fact have these ideas, right? And they were incubating, and they were sort of these hidden treasures gestating, just waiting to see the light of day. And what Attract did is facilitate that, to sort of stimulate them to bring it to the next level and prioritize it higher and really invest time and energy to get to work on it. So that was I think a very pleasant surprise for us.
Yeah, thanks for this insight. And I've seen some questions also on specific projects. I think they're going to be also a great appetite. And again, as you mentioned, this was a more of a holistic analysis of the portfolio.
Right.
But what I see from the question is that there are some interest also on some application. So then what I would pose to those viewers who are interested in specific projects is to go to the marketplace or to the showroom.
Absolutely.
If you're
Absolutely.
only joining us now, you are going to have videos over the lunch break that tells you exactly where to locate the marketplace and the showroom, where the project representative of this 170 project will be able to even have one-to-one virtual meetings with you.
That's a great idea. It's a fantastic resource we've developed there.
Exactly, and this is really also today a milestone, because this was put together recently, and what we wanted to have is a really visually attractive and easily browsable and with a lot of filters for the different projects. So that's something which I really invite all the viewers to. I'm still in the meantime monitoring the questions. There are not so many. So what I would propose,
Romain, one other thing we did learn, which I think is interesting, and that is the role of my own institution, Esade, and Aalto University. We're business schools. We're schools of management, and when initially, and this is not just coming from the data, but from other experience while working in the project consortium, is that a lot, you think it's sort of a stereotype, but because so many of these projects came out of very intense, deep tech, highly sophisticated engineering contexts, many of our project owners were super enthusiastic about the training we gave them in venture capital, in sales, in commercialization, in business model formulation, and so forth. And that was also a very pleasant surprise for my own institution, because there was a genuine need for our knowledge and our services and our capabilities in this larger equation. So I think it's not just to speak to promote my own institution, but I was pleasantly surprised to see that to the degree that we are fundamentally different as in schools of management and business, to what degree that the project owners embrace those opportunities to combine it with their own expertise. That was a great experience.
Yeah, great. And so questions are coming. Of course, it's the end of the session almost, so questions are coming up. One question, comparing Europe, is it often mentioned that innovative ecosystems are lacking? How do you see this, and how does it influence impact?
Well, I mean, this is a common narrative, and you hear it again and again about the European innovation paradox, and our sort of the venture capital community being risk averse and all these types of things. And I'm sure there's a lot of substance to a lot of those arguments, and it's. You hear it from many sources, so I don't want to repeat it. What Europe does have, I think, what's important, instead of focusing on what Europe doesn't have, is to focus on what Europe does have. And that is, it has some of the most successful scientific research infrastructures on the planet simply. And this is a tremendous source of potential value of deep tech for startups and entrepreneurs. So going back to your original question, yeah, we probably need to look at the differences between North America and Europe and put those mechanisms in place in a purposeful way. But I don't think that the problem is a lack of expertise or scientific sophistication, right?
Mm-hmm. Great. Thanks a lot. Before closing the session, and thanks again for joining us, I just wanted to mention that you just published a report with the result of what you shared with us today. And we're also going to show on slide where to download it from. So if you were interested by what Jonathan shared with you, this is really the place to go and to check in more details the analysis which was conducted, and again in the boundary condition that Jonathan set out. So this early stage analysis and waiting, of course, for the results of the project to be further analyzed, and then really from the baseline be able to look at what are the lessons we can learn out of it.
Absolutely.
So thanks again, Jonathan, for joining us today. Congratulations also for the report. It's quite a lot of work, so I guess you had a interesting and also quite hard work put in there.
Well, it's fascinating. It's fascinating.
Okay, so I guess people will come to you if they have questions, and especially on the report that you just published.
Okay, thank you, Romain.
Thanks again for joining. And before we close for the morning session, I just wanted to share with you some elements for the afternoon session. So just recapping on this morning. So we had quite some information about attract, research, science, innovation. Data also took quite a further discussion on a different level. We've been at the strategic level, more operational level, also now with Jonathan. So what the project did with the funding and all these type of questions, really more into the practicality of attract. So we hope that it gave you quite a large spectrum of what we did in attract. I think it's fair to say that this is an evolving concept. So as I mentioned, and Michael and Sergio also mentioned this morning in a welcome address, that this is evolving based on the learnings on the way. And there are going to be more learnings again this afternoon, because after lunch, we will discuss the future of deep tech with other lenses. So a group of students will share with us how deep tech can actually contribute to social innovation. So a very interesting session as well. Amy Webb, who is a futurist, will share with us what she has actually analyzed in terms of all the technology and investment that are actually today already being made, how this will influence what she calls a synthetic decade. So what's coming up? So if you really want to check what the future is holding for us, I really invite you to come back this afternoon as well. And we will have also a very lively panel discussion on how to fund disruptive innovation. So for these 3 reasons, I really invite you to come back starting at 1. And in the meantime, I remind you that videos are playing for you to really get all the functionalities of the website that we put together, for you to interact with each other, to browse the 170 projects, and to get to know more about the Attract ecosystem in the virtual environment that we put together for the purpose of this conference. Just also, I'm happy to see that since this morning, we have seen the number of meetings scheduled really on the rise. So just make use of it. You will have after the conference today at 4 and all day tomorrow to meet virtually with the participants you would like to interface with, to create new opportunities with, so don't hesitate. Watch the videos if you join us in the meantime. They will tell you exactly what you need to be doing to get this functionality going. So thanks for joining for the morning session. We see each other at 1, so just in an hour from now, with this very interesting program that I just outlined. So thanks again, and stay tuned.